Hello, and again, welcome to Bit Depth. I'm Santiago Ramones. Across from me is...
Daniel Ramones.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for doing this with me and allowing me to be self-indulgent and talk about my music. Although this is also your music, technically.
Yeah, technically. I mean, as far as my music goes, there's not a long list. So.
But I got you to play on this track today. We're talking about Familial, which is the fourth track on Bloom, and you play saxophone on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess first things first, how do you feel about the track?
I like it. It makes me happy. I like how contrapuntal it is. I think that the way each specific voice is layered, it was done really intelligently, and I really appreciate that. I think it's really easy when you start adding more than two voices to repeat the same idea melodically, and I don't think you did that at all, which I really appreciated.
Well, cool. Now, what thoughts or questions do you have for me?
Well, having taken a crack at writing music here and there myself, the thing that was always hardest for me was writing melodies. And I know it's kind of a age-old, kind of a trite idea, but how do you approach that? How did you approach that in this track?
Yeah, so I think at first, the melody is actually the first thing that came.
Interesting.
In a weird way, I don't think I try to write melodies, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. A lot of times it's just like improvising. And I usually do a very intuitive approach to melodies.
Okay.
Especially at the time that I wrote this, I knew a lot less about music. Mm-hmm. And so I think I was just, as most of the ideas based on piano around that time, it was when you and I both were in music school, actually, and in practice room, just not practicing the things I should be practicing,
right, and
just noodling around on piano. I had that thing.
It sounds, on its own, it sounds almost just like a basic arpeggio, but it goes a little bit further than just that.
Yeah.
Which I think makes it more interesting, and it makes it a good foundation.
Yeah. I think the other part that makes it a nice melody to hear, one, it doesn't start on the downbeat. Mm-hmm. And so there's a little bit of like a syncopation to it. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I think the approach to melody that I usually have is just, does it fit? And where is it going? Mm-hmm. And so with that, it's like it's starting somewhere, but then it does do the arpeggio of the 5/7 chord up to somewhere. Yeah. Even though it kind of dies off, it still like feels like motion.
Right.
And a lot of my stuff at the time and on this album is very loop based.
Yeah.
And so I would just take an idea, and rather than go somewhere else melodically, I would just sit in that space and put stuff on top of it. And so instead of growing sideways, I was growing upwards.
Yeah.
And so I guess this other one.
Yeah, it never resolves fully.
Right. Yeah, and that allows it to just keep looping. Mm-hmm. And then whenever the like alternate sections come in, then more of it can go somewhere else. Yeah. And so it's kind of funny looking back at it, because I can be a little bit more judgy about it. The intro, or like the beginning of it, is just kind of introducing all the voices and, hey, here's all the stuff that we're playing with.
Right.
So here's a piano, here's another melody, here's the chords, here's some guitar, and there's a guitar melody, then there's a flute, and then there's saxophone. Mm-hmm. And so all of that is playing this idea, and then this other kind of section comes in, but it's short. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, hey, here's some comfort, and let's back away from it, and then here's the comfort again.
Yeah.
And then there's like a longer sort of C-section that really cuts the baby out.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
And so it is, like you said, contrapuntal. It has the play with the piano and the flute to kind of do communicating with each other.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what I appreciate about that, about the way that you use the same versions of these melodies is what I really enjoy out of a lot of the great looping artists. Mm-hmm. Like you think Rat-a-Tat, you think Daft Punk. Mm-hmm. It's that they're using the same toys over and over again, and they lead it to a point to where it feels entirely different. Mm-hmm. And that's what you do in this track. I mean, it has a peak without necessarily having anything that's outside of it, you know, and I think that makes it fun to listen to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think using those alternate sections that go away from the loop can really help push once you get back to that home feeling of that initial melody, especially after that long C-section. Yes, C-section joke again. You can, like, once it jumps back to that, it's like, whoa, hey, here we are again. How nice it is to come back here.
Right.
And so that's I don't know if all of that was intentional to, like, I guess I wouldn't have explained it then the way I just did now, but that's probably where my intuition was going, why I wanted to go somewhere else for a little bit and why I went back to the home thing.
Yeah. It's almost sonata-ish in that way.
Sure. Yeah. And this is kind of one of the more like classical feeling ones on the album. So yeah.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, interesting that it would have been me who ended up playing on this more classical one when my whole musical world was all classical and you're a lot of everything.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because, like, I think even at the time while we were both in classical music, I was still not like all the way in. And that's probably why I changed majors anyways, because I still wasn't all the way in.
Yeah, I understand that. I think what's interesting too about this is that the way you explain your way of writing melody is for itself, for going somewhere. It sounds almost like an avant-garde sort of definition, you know, music for music's sake, just like art for art's sake kind of idea. And it explains an evolution of your compositional talents.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And especially, again, at this time, I wasn't really trying to do something. Like, I wasn't going somewhere. I need to write a piece that's like this. The music came first.
Yeah.
And so me noodling around on piano in the practice room was the foundation. It wasn't like, I want to write a piece so that Daniel can play on it so I can feel like I have interacted with family in my musical creation, which is sort of the retroactive meaning that I've given the piece by giving it this title. Right. But even then, like, the title doesn't have to be there. It doesn't have to feel like family. But now I can sort of look back at it and be like, yeah, the way that the flute and the piano talk to each other is kind of how I have this idea now of, like, family is a relationship that you don't have a choice about.
Right.
And that may not always result in purely positive experiences. There's going to be some ups and downs, but at the end of the day, we're still connected by blood and really by
genes.
Well, yes, I was going to say by water, because the phrase that's like blood is thicker than water is actually like the opposite of what it means. Because it goes, the bonds made in blood are thicker than the water of the womb. And so it's like whenever you like cut your hand and do a blood handshake with a friend, that's like a friend bond that is stronger than like a family bond.
Interesting.
Yeah, that phrase is actually backwards.
Yeah,
and the way that people use it is backwards. But so like we're connected by water rather than blood.
Huh. That's I mean, while there is water in that fluid, it's mostly other things.
There's a lot of blood. But to go back to this family idea is that you can, I guess, like anyone could just disavow themselves from family and just completely disconnect. But whether you like it or not, that connection is still going to be there. You still came from the same womb. You still are a part of this thing. And so, yes, you may want to, or you may be able to willingly separate, but that's still there. And I feel like because that bond is there, I would encourage anyone to pursue, to continue to connect that bond.
Well, I think there's a lot to be said for, without meaning it this way, while it's still, saying it, you are biased.
Yes.
Because considering any sort of negative experience we may have gone through in our childhood, however few they really were, our family bonds have always been really strong, Yeah. There's something a lot to be said, too, for just our community, just Latin community is usually very, very dependent on family.
Yes.
But the fact that you, me, and our older brother, Jesus, went through such a specific type of childhood experience in Coming to America Part 2. I think there's something that we have in common with each other that we don't with most of the people that we come in contact with.
Yeah.
And, I think our parents have this kind of symbolic meaning to us as the old guard, our life that we had in Venezuela, however little of it there was there. Right. We've experienced so much together here, and we experienced both of those things. So, I think there's a lot of people who have really terrible family relationships. Sure. And what you say is true, but I've seen situations in which my advice was like, hey, stay out of your family. Like leave your family to do their foolishness.
Sure.
And you get out. But, we are lucky.
Yeah.
In that, I mean, the worst of our family relationships has really not been all that bad.
Right. And okay, so, and I appreciate that perspective. And so to update that, it's like, I guess, nourish the family relationships while they are still able to be nourished.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And if it becomes beyond toxic and abusive, then you definitely should get out of there.
Exactly.
But while those relationships are still able to be nurtured and helped and reinforced, then because I mean, there's also the instances where there may be family that you might lose too soon, and you wish that you could have established that connection.
Yeah. Well, and two, on top of what I said, like automatically your family does deserve more effort than any person that you've met. I mean, in most instances, there's of course outliers of, crack babies who are left in a dumpster and things like that. But I think if your family put up with you through your childhood and was there for you, even if they did a bad job, they still deserve a good amount of effort.
Sure. Yeah. All of that to say that, like, this little thing.
I mean, with this one specifically, I think the rhythmic counterpoint is, I mean, it's so cool.
Right. And then the other one, which is the longer one. That, to me, the idea of counterpoint is kind of like a discussion or argument that like family members might have. But then in the end, everything kind of leads back to that home feeling, to where, even though we might have our differences, like we're still connected. And that's kind of what I can backwards ascribe a meaning to it.
Yeah.
And
we'll always Tito together. Well, you might sow dough and I might Tito, or vice versa.
Right. But we're still leading to dough.
Exactly.
Or a dough chord.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the piece, and what I like about it is its simplicity. Mm-hmm. My curiosity was there about your approach to writing music, because for me, there was always a purpose, mm-hmm. There was always a reason, something I was trying to write for, or just, I don't know, an idea. Right. I want to be able to have a piece that sounds like it could be in an action movie, mm-hmm. or something like that. Or there was one that I wrote that, like, I wanted to be descriptive of the story of Prometheus Bound. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I guess just outside of just this piece alone, have you ever kind of written with that sort of romanticist approach?
Yeah, definitely. There's still a string quartet that I have that I can't title other than just string quartet. Yeah. It definitely has emotions and feelings in it and some sort of imagery, mm-hmm. but like I don't know what it's saying concretely. Yeah. And so it still remains to be this, just like, it is sounds, it is music. Yeah. And I like how it sounds, and that string quartet isn't the only other thing, but there is definitely stuff that sometimes stuff just pops out, mm-hmm. and I don't know what to do with it. And sometimes it's hard to just title it, because titling things gives them meaning. Yeah. And sometimes the meaning is just the music itself. And then, yeah, there's, like you said, having purpose and stuff. There's definitely lots of other stuff where I'll write and be like, I want this to feel like this. Mm-hmm. I want this to evoke some sort of feeling. I want this to evoke some sort of imagery. Mm-hmm. But I feel like even with this one, maybe the meaning comes from, even if it began as just like music for music's sake, the instruments that are in it are also what evokes some of the feelings and maybe some of the imagery. And so, like, having a guitar, mm-hmm. or having an acoustic guitar.
Yeah, that gives it such a friendly sound.
Yeah. Or even like the percussion that I chose, like a shaker, mm-hmm. or there's still some drums, but it's like mostly auxiliary percussion.
Mm-hmm. I think this specifically gives it kind of a kumbaya feel, Yeah. Which is, plays back into that familial.
Sure. Yeah. And then it does, you could even have it be like an actual family, like in a room, because these are all instruments that humans play, right? Not just electronics. And so, yeah, like a family coming together and like playing around, because it's just mm-hmm. 1/5. Yeah. And then whenever the other sections happen, like it's only 2 people. And so like, hey, we're going somewhere else. And so maybe not everyone might be able to play along with this. But then once it comes back, it's like, hey, everyone can join in on this simple 1/5 thing.
I like that. I think that's a really cool kind of description. It's really easy for me to picture it that way, because there's almost some more virtuosic parts. Mm-hmm. So you have maybe like the one sibling is like a really good player, and then there's a sibling that's just like, hey, I'm not great at music, but I can shake these shakers. And sure. Coming together, they're just having a conversation.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Do you want me to spare you from hearing your solo saxophone?
I can handle the sound of my playing more than the sound of my voice. And I've been doing pretty well so far.
I guess something to note while I am bringing us here is that I didn't give you like sheet music to, hey, play this. Mm-hmm. This was kind of one of the very first instances of my like collaborative recording of music, mm-hmm. which is just like, I made a thing, want to be a part of it. And rather than being just like, here is the music. I'm composer, you are music machine.
Right.
Like I do so much with the computer. But instead it was, I have a thing, put your signature onto it, whatever that might be. And so I didn't take all of the things that you had played just because you were improvising on top of the chord progression. But like I grabbed the nice stuff and put that in. Also put a delay on it because it sounds cool. I really like that one.
Yeah. I think if you just wanted to keep playing me playing saxophone instead of just talking to me, I think I'd be much happier with that as a podcast. And
well, I mean, I like taking the time to. What I wanted to acknowledge that little ending there.
a nice little vibrato. Yeah, it was good.
But I like taking the time to like show each little piece just because you may not be paying attention when you're listening to the whole track. And so it's like, hey, here's each little component. And I do think that even though it was kind of like spontaneously spur of the moment, like here, play a thing in my room, the things that you added to it make this track more special. One, because it's you and you're my brother and I love you, but it's also because that collaboration and that trust, I know you have a musical foundation and knowledge about this that I can just give you, here's a 1/5 progression and you can just play over it. And it made sense to you. And that's how musical collaboration works. And without that, I feel like this piece would be radically different.
I respect that.
Yeah.
I like hearing that. I think, I mean, for me specifically, I was pretty close to the peak of my playing at that point in time. If I'd known that it was going to be something I was going to talk about years later, I probably would have chosen a less airy read. But otherwise, I feel pretty good about how it sounds. And I feel pretty good about it specifically too, because improvising through my saxophone was not ever something that I did. You know, the closest and best improvising I ever did was through Familial. Just like actually 5 arrow up, arrow down, S, F, the hotkeys on Familial.
Yeah, exactly.
And like, creating melodies that way. I was never good enough at the piano to create melodies there. I could play major scales and stuff like that, but it never felt comfortable. And even though I played the saxophone for 13, 14 years, something like that, I was on the page saxophone player, I could sight read a good deal of saxophone sheet music, and what I couldn't sight read, what was too hard, I could take a couple weeks, take a crack at it and play it pretty dang well. Sure.
And sure, just because this is a podcast and so we can just have the conversation, even though it doesn't necessarily have to be about the track. But like, I do think that, and this is an idea that coincides with the stuff we've been saying anyways, but I do feel like classical music doesn't take enough time to encourage improvisation in its performers.
I agree with that.
I do think it's kind of a shame that like even extremely virtuosic performers are basically reduced to music machines.
Right.
And so
interpretation machines,
sure,
because I think there is a lot to be said for that too, because I didn't just, play what was on the page. I did put myself into it, but I never, produced my own sounds.
Sure. And I think that's the thing is that whenever you ask even really good players to just play something, a lot of times people freeze up or they don't know where they're going. And it's scary because we don't spend enough time encouraging that freedom and that creativity to just be like, play, it's okay.
Right. Well, and it's interesting too, because whenever in all the instances in which I have been asked to improvise, I needed a full theoretical breakdown of what was going on before I could just play, you know. I was just like, oh, hold on, we're in the key of F sharp, okay, that's A to me, and okay, you're going minor four, that's C sharp, E D, okay, or E F sharp, okay, and you are going where? Like, I needed to know everything that was happening, even if somebody's just playing on a guitar and they're like, well, I got an F here and a C here and a B flat here. I needed like every note that you're playing on that guitar. I need to know what it is so I can play off of that. And it is, you know, it's a completely different talent. I remember in high school in Wind Symphony, we had a Sam Hazo piece called Ride. Yeah. And it's a beautiful piece. Yeah. It's super fun. It makes you want to like run from bad guys kind of. And there's one little spot where there's just a little bit of improv. They ask you to do just a little bit of improv. Yeah. And it like scared my socks off, you know, being the first chair senior alto saxophone player. Like even there, my talents weren't there, you know?
Sure. But it is interesting because something that I actually talked about in the podcast before this one, which is I was always shy about my voice and singing because whenever you're playing an instrument, you're like one step disconnected from you at least.
Yeah. You hide.
Sure. But then when it's your voice, it's still like, it's very much you. You can't detach yourself from your voice. But then in a way, by asking someone to improvise on their instrument, that's going directly back to them. And you're kind of bypassing the instrument and being like, well, I want your brain to go through the instrument. And sometimes that's not what is being asked for by an orchestra. Yeah. Because it's like, no, you are given the notes and you play the notes. Right. And so then you're being asked for more than just the notes on the page. Right. And that is scary. And that is a truest form of you in that instance. And that can be scary. But hopefully over time, and kind of going back to the album, this album is a time capsule of my growth as a musician. And it was me allowing myself to be free to create. And so without necessarily having to focus on the pressure of it being a certain way or it being right or it having a point. Yeah. It was just my escape from, especially at the time, being in classical world. Yeah. It was my form of escape to be like, let me just make something and be happy with it. And that can be a truer reflection of who I was then rather than just singing the art songs that I was then, which was a form of expression for me too.
Yeah, absolutely.
But this even more so.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I can respect that, you know, I think it's really interesting to see that growth from you, you know, because I think just around that time was whenever you stepped out of UCO, right? And started going to ACM. Yeah. And I think I saw you grow in comfort from that, you know, because it is kind of a tight butt world. Yeah. The classical world, you know, and I think my aspirations into it weren't necessarily either filling into the tight butt space either. It was more that I wanted to be the leader of the tight butts, you know? Yeah. Yeah.
You have the tightest of the butts.
Yeah. Right. I wanted to conduct, you know, so it was cool. And that's kind of what my expression was. And that's where I'd say that the interpretation matters a lot when you're just reading off the page, because that is absolutely the coolest part of the job of a conductor is that you know this piece so well that you are taking what's on the page and creating something that nobody's ever done before. Yeah. You know, it's still Beethoven's Fifth. It's still Nimrod. It's still what have you. But, you know, those specifically, I mean, those two and a couple others I could name right off the spot, it's every time they're played, they're completely different. Yeah. You know, you can't find two similar recordings of Beethoven's Fifth. And that's cool. That comes from the conductor. Yeah. It comes from the musicians too, you know, but in a true professional orchestra, that conductor was a part in choosing the musicians to begin with.
Yeah. And it is kind of like the conductor is playing the instrument that is the orchestra.
Yeah.
And so in one sense, yeah, you can play the instrument of a saxophone, but it's a completely different thing to play the instrument that is the orchestra.
Right.
And the expression that comes with that and the connection that comes with that. And that should be the goal of making music, is the connection, the kind of overused quote at this point that I've been hearing a lot, but self-forgetting at oneness that comes through music.
Yeah.
I heard that sentence a little too many times in my master's, but but that is the goal. And so sometimes the institutions get really bogged down into what is necessary to make that happen.
What does legato mean? What does adagio mean? What does, all that specific kind of thing.
Right.
I get that.
Yeah.
That reminds me of the master class we had with David Maslenko. Were you ever there for it? Okay. He used to talk about being in the circle, and like his circle was like another way of saying being in the zone.
Yeah.
But it's whenever you are completely removed from everything that happened that day, all of your worries, and you are so entirely focused on this piece, and where, you and the performer next to you feel like one entity altogether, and the piece is all that matters.
Right. And that's why it's important to have a conversation with the composer as well. Oh, yeah. Rather than just the conductor. Because, I feel like at the time, too, like, Dr. Lamb was talking about, like, oh, don't, like, you keep playing wrong notes and stuff. And it's like it was there being like, it's okay if you play wrong notes. Yeah. I want you to feel it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's when it really feels cool, is when you're like 2 measures ahead. Your eyes are 2 measures ahead of where your fingers are, and you're just kind of going into the piece. You know, it's a cool feeling. Yeah. I miss it.
Daniel, thank you for doing this with me.
Yeah. Yeah. I really enjoyed it.
Where can we find you and your things if you have things to plug? I guess your restaurant. If you want. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Come to Mexican Radio, 1734 Northwest 16th Street. Make a reservation on Open Table, or just call ahead. 405-900-5608 is our phone number. I'm the general manager. The bar menu is my baby. There's a lot of drinks in there. The Fizzy Paloma, the Casual Old Fashioned. Lots of things I'm really proud of. Our food is incredible as well.
I dared to open the floodgates.
Yeah, you did. I love that place. I put my heart and soul into it. Yeah, come check me out. I'm always there.
No, it makes me really happy to like see you do that though, actually. So
there you go. Yeah.
What is, dare I do this to you, but what is best taco?
Oh, that's a hard one. Well, it goes back and forth daily for me. I can't eat tacos every day, or else I'd be a blob. But the ones that whenever I do indulge, I go for the Jack taco. I go for the fried chicken taco, the fried shrimp po' boy, egg and brisket. Oh, egg and brisket's really good. We smoked the brisket in-house. It's got salsa roja, fried egg, refried beans, flour tortilla. It's awesome.
Yeah. It's a good thing I just ate so that I don't have the desire to eat again.
That's totally cool. And, if you're, despite everything that's going on right now, even if you don't feel like going out to eat, even though we're all sanitizing, we're all wearing masks and all that, you can do curbside. And we're happy to bring it out to your car, and they travel well too. Yeah.
Yeah, we did that the other day.
Exactly.
Really
right.
Good.
Exactly right. There you go.
Once again, thank you.
Yeah. I loved it.
And now here's Familial in its entirety. You can find everything that I do on my website, santiagoramones.com. I make music. Bloom will be available on August 8th, streaming everywhere. Put it on in the background, put it on your workout playlist, show it to your friends so you can all enjoy it together. You can also buy the thing and get bonus content to get a bit deep into the emotions you can feel with it. I also make music with Power Cycle, an experimental electronic trio. Our first completely improvised album, Too Many Damn Cables, is streaming everywhere. More to come from Power Cycle in the future. To support this podcast, leave reviews, comments, tell your friends about it, and buy my music, because by supporting me, you're supporting the podcast. I always end the podcast with my 3 things. They shape my life philosophy. Those 3 things are: love never fails, it's going to be okay, I might be wrong.